Hello and welcome to a book review of Among Others by Jo Walton that won the Nebula Award in 2011, and I have absolutely no idea why. The best way for me to summarize this book is it is a best of 60s and 70s science fiction and fantasy list with a magic fairy story tacked on as told from the perspective of a disabled Welsh girl who is in her teenage years and kind of coming of age. Just like with the last book that I reviewed that had disability representation, Flowers for Algernon by Daniel Keyes. The story is told in a series of journal entries from the main character. The main character is one half of a set of twins and has lost her twin in a tragic accident, which you figure out later what it was. And that is the reason why the main character is disabled. And this Welsh girl can see fairies and do magic and and that ability was inherited from her crazy mother, which is part of one of the main problems that comes up in the story, is that in order to get away from her crazy mother, she goes and ends up living with her father, who turns out to be a product of an affair, and he lives with his three sisters who are kind of like triplets, but not really. Like, they're all born at different times. They're just very similar to each other. And because they don't want to deal with this child, they send the main character off to a boarding school, and it's just, I don't know how else to describe it. When I say I don't know why this book won the Nebula Award, I am being quite serious about that. It is okay, but that's it. It's just, it's okay. I enjoyed the story, but that's because I myself am a disabled person. I know the cruelty of living as a disabled girl in the world, and also not being able to communicate with others in a way that isn't a little bit too direct. I also know what it's like to have spent the majority of my childhood and adolescence with my nose in a book because I couldn't relate to other people due to, you know, the ADHD and the autism that wasn't diagnosed until I was well into adulthood. So I could very easily see myself in this book, which is where I got some enjoyment from it, is because I was like, okay, well, this is very easy for me to read. Also, as someone who is, I still consider myself new to science fiction, it's a great reading list. Like, I've heard of a lot of other authors that I haven't heard about before, and if you want a place to learn about, 60s and 70s science fiction, this would be a great place to start if you don't mind the fairy story that's attached to it. The only way I can recommend this book is that if you are, an older adult male and you have like a daughter or a granddaughter you are trying to convince to read science fiction, but she primarily reads fantasy, give her this book. Give her this book. I feel like that might help convert. Maybe that was the point of this book, is to try to bridge that gap, because the reason why I'm now reading science fiction as an adult, first of all, I didn't know Ray Bradbury was considered science fiction. I have a Fahrenheit 451 tattoo on my arm. I thought that was just American classical literature. I thought Ray Bradbury was an American classic writer. I did not realize that it's considered science fiction, just like I didn't think H.G. Wells was science fiction. I just thought that was just classic lit until I was an adult. I am of the generation that, fantasy is for girls, science fiction is for boys. I read all the fantasy books. That's what was fed to me. And then my brother read Ender's Game. But other than to try and convince a fantasy reader to read science fiction, I don't know where else this belongs. Like, it takes place in, the first entry is in 1975. The rest of the entries are the fall and winter of 1979 into, the beginning of 1980. And as I said, it's a coming of age story as told from a disabled Welsh girl who can see fairies and does magic, but reads primarily science fiction. And it's just her talking about the science fiction book she's reading with her growing up in this boarding house, or in this boarding school, and like her life and seeing fairies and magic and talking about boys and like that kind of life. It is just, I don't know. I'm glad I got an opportunity to read it. I definitely never would have read this book if I was not reading the Nebula Awards. I don't think anybody would have read this book. I don't know anybody to have read this book. I looked on YouTube to see if anybody had read this book, and it's about the same as the Charlie Jane Anders book, where there's a couple reviews from like 7 years ago, maybe 1 or 2 reviews from like 3 years ago, but like nobody's talking about this book because I feel like it had some acclaim when it came out, and then it's just kind of died because, just like I think with the Charlie Jane Anders book, it is a mixture. It's trying to make fantasy and science fiction cohabitate in the same space, but it's not really working that well. I do feel like Charlie Jane Anders did a better job with that, but it's like the two, but it's not even like science fiction fantasy. Like I feel like Dream Snake, another Nebula Award winner, that I would consider a science fiction fantasy. I think that melds the two together, but in a coherent way where it's not just like, here's science fiction, here's fantasy. Let me just kind of like oil and water them together to make a salad dressing. I'm so frustrated because this is the second book in this Nebula Award Challenge that is like that. Like I said, like All the Birds in the Sky, where it's like, I looked at the list of the other books that were with that, and like there were 2 other books that I feel, one was by Jack McDermott, which is also a Nebula Award winner, and then the other one is N.K. Jemisin, which is also a Nebula Award winner that won awards later on. I feel like maybe their books probably would have been more deserving. The only way I can think that this won the Nebula Award is because of the disability representation. Again, reminiscent for the Flowers of Algernon, without as much depth or as well written. I feel like Flowers of Algernon is a much better book on every level. Other than the just copious amounts of fan service and ego stroking for the science fiction and the fantasy writers that this book discusses. I don't know who the exact judges are, but it just feels very much like this is a fan service book. So like, if you've read all the books that this main character read, and you had the same impressions that the main character had, you'd be like, oh, I agree with this. This is great. This is a great list. I totally agree with the science fiction list. This is a great list. Oh, there's fairies and disability representation. You get to win. I don't know. The prose isn't that great. I honestly have no idea why this book won. I'm glad I got an opportunity to read it, and like I said, I do feel like this definitely fills a specific niche. So if you are someone who is struggling to get your preteen or teenage daughter or MB to read science fiction, I do recommend this book for them. Give them this book among others, especially if they read primarily fantasy. I think this will help bridge the gap, and also give you like an in to talk about those with them. Hopefully, like I said, the very beginning chapter is good, and it might be enough to get them in there to where they can like get into the book a little bit more and get them more curious about science fiction. I am grateful that I got an opportunity to read this. So Tetsunjin, who is the one who gifted this to me, thank you very much. I'll use your handle versus your real name, despite I know what it is now, unless you give me permission down in the comments below to use your real name. I will just call you Tetsunjin because you have gifted me several books, and again, I do appreciate you giving me this one so I have an opportunity to read it. I will let this move on to a new home just in case one of you out there would like to read it, despite or would like to read it for yourself just to, I don't know, commiserate with me, and or you are trying to figure out a way to give a teenager in your life interested in science fiction. I will pass this on so that way hopefully you can do that for them, because I do, as someone who is now reading a lot more science fiction, who, like I said before, was not beforehand, that is definitely a worthwhile goal is to get, you know, someone interested in science fiction. So grateful to have read this. Thank you very much again, Tut, for this lovely gift. I will see if I can find it a new home, and if not, it'll just stay in my library. But thank you guys for watching this. I think I am a quarter of the way through my Nebula Award Challenge at this point, and I will see you guys for the next review. Until then, bye! Bye.